Hello and welcome to another Jive talk. This is Survive the Jive, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, a well-known figure in the modern history of Germanic heathenism. Ian Reid began his musical career in the late 80s with traditionalist neofolk band Sol Invictus. After studying paganism in Germany, he formed his own neofolk project, Fire and Ice, in 1991, which the website says takes the purity and philosophy of early music and melds it into a message redolent with the powerful seeds of honor, truth, loyalty, and the bond of true friendship. A lot of the songs from the 9 studio albums deal specifically with Germanic heathen themes, and some are actually in Old English and Old Norse, which I particularly like. In 1996, Ian was named as Rune-Master within the Rune-Gild, an initiatory school devoted to the esoteric and exoteric study of the Germanic runes, which was founded by Edred Thorson in the 80s. Ian later became the Drihten who guides the UK activities of the predominantly US-based organization. So today we'll learn all about his work and his beliefs and practices. Welcome to Jive Talk, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
I think there'll be an interesting mix of audience, some people who are very familiar with you and some who aren't. So it has to be a little bit of an introduction to your beliefs. And I think it's quite interesting to start by asking, how does your work as a musician relate to your spiritual beliefs?
Well, I'm not much for writing, although I have occasionally written things, mostly anonymously, but I do like talking. And so I'm more verbal. And to be honest with you, my music was how I wanted to express my views. That's, of course, why my albums are quite rare, because I believe you can only teach what you are. And until I'm more, if you like, in this transformative sense, then I can't write another album. So that's how I think they gel together.
Mm-hmm. So your development, your spiritual development is part of your musical. You express your spiritual development through music as you go. 11 years ago, you said that Peter Bellamy is one of the greatest singers ever, and I agree with you. But since then, his music and English folk in general seem, in my eyes, to have enjoyed a kind of renaissance among British patriots. I know a lot of young men on the right online like to listen to his or post his folk songs. So do you see a future for traditional English folk music of that sort?
Yes, I think it's definitely got a future. If you look at these modern renderings of it, I'm not so sure that I always like when they turn it too much into, well, let's put it this way, musically I quite like some of the sort of poppy versions, if you want to use that rather old-fashioned word. How traditional that is, I don't know, although Andrew King and I would definitely disagree about how far you look for source musicians, whatever that means anyway, which would be his way of looking at it. I believe things need to move into the modern world. But like I say, sometimes it goes a bit far, because I think they're trying to become popular. And that I'm a sort of a traditionalist too far, I think, to make myself comfortable with that, actually.
Mm-hmm. I know what you mean. I've heard some other of the younger folk singers. I'm not that keen even when they do songs I really like. But I'll move on to, would you describe any of your work with fire and ice as devotional magic, as in like a prayer or something like that?
Not really. I mean, I leave it for other people to decide for themselves, but I'm not very much into, I'm not really religious. I think that's a remnant of the old chaos thing. I'm more interested in what you can do with it, if you like, as a technique. For example, if you look at self-transformation.
Sorry, Ian, we're losing you there. I think we've lost your... Sorry, we lost you there. You said you weren't really religious, and then you got cut out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm not so much religious as I am interested in the technique. So if you look at, for example, self-transformation, it's such a broad church, it's unbelievable. You've got people like Buddhists who claim they don't believe in God, although you could argue with that, right through to people who clearly believe in a Mr. God and everything in between. So it's clear to me that the method has to be a method and that it's irrelevant. The rest of it is just your choice, what you want. Well, I choose to have all and everything or none of it myself. That's just the way I work, you know.
That's interesting, but you believe in, you have a religious.
I think we got problems here, which is bizarre because I couldn't hear everything you said, unfortunately.
Say it's fine on their end, so it must be a problem with my end. But apparently you weren't lost before. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I was just saying, you say you're not really religious, but do you think that music can be an expression of your beliefs to, or like your of reverence to a god?
Yes, that's precisely what I do with music. I try and put my ideas out exactly as they are at the time. Of course, they change. I mean, tomorrow morning I'm a different man, I hope, because I always find it rather sad when I meet an old friend from the 20 years ago and he's the same as he was 20 years ago. Whereas, you know, I'm radically different from what I was even 5 months ago for various reasons I won't bore you with, but certainly in the last 5 years I'm a different person, I hope, you know, and hopefully heading in the right direction and not that way, if you like, if you want to use a Christian way of looking at it.
So do you distinguish conventional forms of prayer, like that exist in many religions, including paganism, from ritual magic?
Right. I could talk about this academically, but to be honest with you, I am a person who generalizes everything and doesn't allow anything to grasp me too much. So I just do things, and if they work, I do them. So, you know, it's a bit like saying, what's the difference between Seidr and Galdr, which, for those who don't know, Seidr could be broadly said to be a type of shamanic event, and Galdr is using runes, more control. Do you know what? I don't think our ancestors, in fact, I know they didn't think like that. I mean, what's an apple? It's a round fruit. It's why Germans call an anteater an Ameisenbär, you know, a bear that eats ants. So I try to think in a way like they do. So overly defining things, because I think if you want to talk about magic, it works in the gaps where the world isn't quite secure about itself, and that's, you need to find those gaps. So if you go around making the world too secure, in other words, you live in a scientific paradigm, then it's simply going to oblige you. That's basically how it works, you know, I think. So I don't do that. So I'm sort of not the right person to ask that question, really, if you like.
I think that's a very interesting and valid answer. I mean, this need to categorize is more for modern purposes, and I don't know if I think a lot of academics would agree with you. There isn't actually a meaningful distinction between prayer and ritual magic in many cases. But I just seen this question from one of the audience. AlphaGo asked, could Ian explain a little about what neofolk means to him or us in general, please?
Well, it's a genre of music which I'm a little bit uncomfortable in because it's so broad. Quite often it's fairly meaningless. I mean, I remember one occasion, and a lot of it's pretty awful as well. If these people went into the real folk world, they would be often laughed at, many of them. I mean, I remember one occasion, I shan't mention him to spare his blushes, but he's an extremely well-known neofolk, if you want to use that word, artist, and he was round my place, and I put something on, because I used to get sent stuff for review when I was a magazine editor. And believe me, I took my finger anyway, and he said, God, turn that off. It's just so blasted awful. So I'm not a great fan of a lot of neofolk. Some of it's excellent. Some of it's very good, but some of it's very bad. And believe me, if they, as I said before, if they listened to the sort of, if you like, proper mainstream folk music, then you know, those people would start throwing things at them as they were on stage, basically.
Yeah. What to switch gears a bit and talk more about the Rune-Gild and your work with them, can you tell us a little bit, what is the function and background of the Rune-Gild?
Well, our idea is that we believe that there was a guild in ancient times, and the reason we believe that is because the way it spread, so organized that it means or implies quite heavily that they must have had some sort of organization, albeit probably, given the distance and the difficulty of travel, not in the sense that we understand. Perhaps I understand it more, being old enough to be pre-internet and all the rest, when you had to go in the library if you wanted to join a group and find out about it. So we believe that we have a right, because of our academic rigor to some extent and everything else, to believe that we are the same thing as they were. And our idea is to train certain unusual people to be rune masters and to understand the mystery of the Northern European people and to transform themselves. And that is, now, one thing I need to say here is, remember, all of this is only my opinion. One thing we do not do is impose our opinion on people. So most of our masters might be broadly in agreement, but they would differ quite a bit. So, I mean, we're often accused, for example, of Edred being the great big guru. Well, Edred's been sort of taking a back seat for the last 10 years. And I know for a fact that he doesn't have a massive influence necessarily on what they think in America. And he has absolutely none in Europe, because we have complete and utter hegemony. So we're not that sort of an organization. We're interested in individuals, and individuals produce. So someone might come along one day and produce a whole load of tattoos as his masterwork. You know, we take something. What we're interested in is a transformation. But the trouble with occult groups is they say, right, you know, I've got this girlfriend and I want her to be the next degree up, so I'm going to make her up. There's nothing behind it, but who cares? We make the choice. Well, we don't do that. We say, when you do a work, it has to hit the table with a thump. I know a tattoo would be, well, if it was on your arm, I suppose. But, you know, you could take that, if you like, with a certain pinch of salt. So we say you have to do a fellowship work to be a fellow, and it has to be accepted. So it's a bit like a university, and a masterwork has to be a step above that and has to be accepted by the mastery to be the same. So like in a guild. And I would say that's relatively unusual. And seeing as at one time I knew everything about every occult group that ever existed. I mean, if some magician farted in Malaysia, I'd get a phone call half an hour later when I was the editor of the 2 magazines I did, and someone would tell me. So I can speak authoritatively about that. They have no standards. You know, everyone's a high priest. Well, guess what? The vicar on the end of your road has got a degree in divinities and may have learned Anglo-Saxon or Old Norse. I mean, my friend who's a vicar, I used to go and we practiced music together, folk music. We would talk in German together. He knew French, which I don't very well, but he was writing books. So, see what I mean? There has to be some standard. So I would say our function is to help people transform, but we don't impose. They get the 9 doors, which Edward wrote, but it's very loose. Basically, they are taking the ideas in it and making them their own, which is most important. Because I can't speak for all masters, but I think you'd have a lot of agreement here, is what we're interested in is people being individuals, which of course makes it difficult running a group, because You know, a group of people like that together, as a great friend of mine said, is like trying to herd cats.
So your work is like in the occult and stuff. Does that mean that the Rune-Gild is also influenced by like Hermeticism or occultism and like other initiatory traditions outside the Northern tradition?
Well, I think things don't come out, you know, we're not an island. There has to be influence. Nigel Pennick speaks most intelligently about how the fact that if you looked at British occult, I'm not comfortable with that word, but never mind, then you will see that you can't even take Christianity out of it because of the influence of that over a long period. Now, okay, we try to look behind that because, you know, quite honestly, runes were still in use when Christianity was losing its hold on people. So it's a continuous tradition, if you like, in some places. But I come back to what I said about the occult. I'm uncomfortable with them. I mean, Edward says that we're in opposition to them. Perhaps that's taking it a bit further than I would. But we believe that you must start with the known. So you start with an academic look at it insofar as you can. You pile up on the table everything we know about this, which is why, you know, Edward and James Chisholm produced the Sather workbook. In there is everything that was ever written ever in any language about Sather. So if anyone said Sather is this, you could say, okay, show me the source that's in here, because this is everything. Now, since there have been a few finds, but I mean, it's no doubt it will be updated at some point, but that's our approach. And from there, you move into the unknown. What most occult groups is they start with the unknown and they move further into it, into cloud cuckoo land. And that's something I'm not comfortable with. Now, I'm not, okay, I went to university and studied Old Norse, Norwegian runology. So I have some academic background. A lot of people in the guild have more than I do. But whilst I don't think that's the only answer, but it is important for the reasons I said. You don't want to be in cloud cuckoo land. You want to at least have some. No, we don't know enough. We don't have the philosophy, because the Christians, who didn't have one either, they nicked it from the Greeks and Romans, but that's another story. They came along before this had developed. So what we're trying to do, if you like, is to develop that, because we're not living, you know, people who lived in the 10th century didn't want to live in the 5th century. So we're not trying to live in the 10th either. We're trying to say, otherwise I wouldn't agree to go on this sort of, you know, electronic medium. So that would be foolish. That would be definitely foolish. But that's really our aim, is to try and do a credible, well, to use the ancient wisdom and truth of our ancestors in the modern world. And of course, we don't get everything right. Sometimes it's a bit of a bootstrap job, for sure. And we're still learning. But, you know, I don't, believe me, I do not claim to be perfect. That's absolutely a fact. But you just do your best, I think. I think there's too much.
Is the Rune-Gild, are you looking to expand in future and get more initiates? Or is it still, is it meant to be more closed off and exclusive?
Well, we're not closed off. It's just difficult because people do not like doing the work. So anyone can join as an associate. And one of the problems we get, and you hear people talking, bad mouthing us, if you like, and they say, oh, I've spoken to some members. They've never spoken to me. And they've never spoken to any other master or any other fellow or even any other learner. They've spoken to associates who are not members. So that's another thing that's interesting. But anyone can join, but then they have to do the work. And an associate's job is to convince a master to take him on as a learner. And that's up to him. Masters are obliged to take learners, but they're not obliged to take any specific one. So what you do, you look around, and we post, the masters post their shingle, if you like, and you look at that and you say, that bloke is into this aspect, or he lives near me, so I'll approach him, or a woman, of course. But then they don't do the work, because we're not interested in people don't do the work. I mean, it's up to them. I can't do anyone's, I can't make anyone anything. The person does it himself. I mean, I spent my life doing various martial arts, and anyone who's done that will know you can motivate people, you can help them, but they have to put the hours in. It's as simple as that. And you quickly find out, to be honest with you, in all the years I've done this, I can normally tell immediately, straight away. I'm rarely wrong. And so that's how it works. But of course, if more people come along, we'd be happy to have them. There's no limit to how, well, the limit of how big you are is human nature. And
Okay.
the ancient rune masters were not interested in large numbers. It wasn't like when they put a rune stone up, it wasn't like a newspaper. They knew that only 1% of people could read it, but they were interested in quality, because when that special person read it, he enchanted it and brought it alive. This is my view on it, and probably the view of other people. And that's what I think is important.
I've heard that you've been into paganism since you were a teenager, but when did you first see the runes, and what effect did it have? Were you immediately moved as soon as you saw these symbols?
The story is actually quite amusing. I was working I was an apprentice, and the people I were with, they were in an English Civil War reenactment group. And so I went along for fun, and they used to use the Hobbit runes to talk to each other, so that the Roundheads and other people didn't know what they were on about. And they also used, because they were anarchist types, really, this is why we got expelled in the end from the English Civil War Society, but I won't go into that. But effectively, they used to worship Odin and stuff like that. Now, of course, for them, it was a big joke. But immediately, because I can't either do something or I don't do it, I looked into it. I thought, wait a minute, this is a serious deal going on here, and the runes are a serious matter. So I quickly got Eliot's book, Runes and Introduction, which was about the only book you could get at the time. I'm afraid I go back to the Stone Age, and that was it. 17 years old, I'd already sworn my oath to Odin in their humorous way, but it didn't matter to me, because in my heart that was a real genuine oath. And of course, Odin is the one, if you like, of other religions. He's the All-Father, so I don't have a problem with that, really.
I've seen a couple of questions from people that I wanted to take. And Dennis Rurikson has sent a super chat. Thank you, Dennis. He asks, why, Mr. Reed, do you think Viking Age runestones are more concentrated in Sweden and especially upland?
Do you know what? If I knew the answer to that, I would be sitting in the stool in Göttingen as the runologist of the world. I don't really know. What I do know, and it amuses me, is you do often see Swedish runes, and they're called Danish runes. Why is that? Because one bloke's a Danish academic and the other bloke's a Swedish academic. So no, I don't know the answer to that. More clever people than me may know the answer, but I'm sorry.
I can say only, I don't know the answer, but I can say that most of those stones are Christian, and they've got nothing to do with paganism anyway. So, or the large concentration of stones in upland. In fact, most of the stones in Sweden are Christian stones. So there was a fashion in like the late Viking era for rune stones, but it wasn't anything to do with paganism so much. It was more like maybe a spread of literacy at the time. There were more rune masters. I don't know why, but I also have seen two people at least ask to please tell us what the flag is that's behind you.
Oh, well, that's the symbol of the Rune-Gild, the three horns. I mean, the number 3 is very important to our ancestors for any number of reasons. I mean, I could bore you for hours about it, but one considers past, present, and future. One of the secrets for those who are a bit more deeply interested in, normally you have 3, but you have 2 are the same and 1 is different. So you have the past and now, which is guaranteed, and we don't have the future. You have to say, I will do this. And so you have the past, you have now, but now is turning into something that will come based on what happened in the past. So you see that, of course, this is why the Christians had to have a Trinity. Come on, it doesn't make any sense. Anyone who can, I mean, the way our ancestors looked at it, the Goths, Wolfhill's the Bible, and that and of course the early Celtic church, that makes a little bit more sense. But really, it's just a lot of nonsense, because A, they had to bring a goddess in the Virgin Mary, and B, they had to bring the number 3 in because it was just so important. And you know, I mean, come on, if you say to our ancestors, we got this bloke, and he's hanging on a cross, and he dies and he comes back to life, they'd say, big deal. That's why we put stones on people and runes and that, because they come back to life and they cause trouble in the town. So they had to think of other ways. So they invented saints with swords. You can't get a king to believe in a god who's meek and all the rest of it. So they had to have Saint Michael, and the whole, you could go on forever about this, really.
Yeah, I thought that's very interesting, the Christian syncretism. And I got the Nordic Triskelion on my t-shirts merchandise to do it, which is 3 different beasts that they had on some on the snake witch stone in Gotland. But I believe the 3-horned motif that you use for the Rune-Gild comes from the Danish stone, the Snoldolef stone, isn't it? I think so. But,
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's really cool. You can see it in the museum, the National Museum in Copenhagen, if anyone listening is near there. But
you could also say there's a tip in the direction of the 3 vessels when Odin stole the mead from the giantess, and led to us being able to write poetry according to the myths.
And there's Adam O'Brien talks about a tripartite gods, like 3, Odin, Thor, and Frey in one temple. Like, seems like they often had things in 3s together. It's like that's like an Indo-European motif that just keeps popping up, like in Slavic and Celtic and all over. Let's move to the next question. So how do you, or did you, if you practice magic, how do you integrate traditional runic magic with chaos magic? And do you see them as meaningfully distinct, or is that another one of those categories that you don't care about?
I wouldn't say I don't care about it. I mean, the situation is that the Odinic community at the time did not like magic. It was as simple as that. And I wanted to learn it. And to learn something, you have to do an apprenticeship, and you have to do things properly. So I had to find somewhere that would do it. And chaos magic didn't care what you did. So I entered into the world of that and just did Germanic stuff. It was as simple as that. Of course, I joined in with other people. That's the price you have to pay. But I did my apprenticeship amongst those people. And just by chance, I have to say that I'm trying to be humble now in my new hat, if you like. Just by chance, I become the big banana in it, whatever that means. I mean, to be honest with you, if you're running something, you're just the biggest servant. You're the one who does all the hard graft. So I wouldn't recommend it. I remember, for example, when people kept giving me a hard time because they wanted to be 2nd degrees in the Illuminates of Thanatos, I just said to them, look, here's the deal. I've got so much work piled up I want people to do. I'm crying out for you to do that. And of course, that stopped a flood of people stepping forward because they didn't want to do the work. That's human nature again, So that's how I relate to it. It was just simply a fact that I needed to do my apprenticeship. And of course, I learned everything you could ever imagine. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings all around the world, in beautiful castles, in extinct volcanoes, on Ilkley Moor, you name it. And it puts me in good stead now, I think, running an organization, because every conceivable problem you can ever imagine, and many you can't, I've already seen and had to deal with, so. And that's it. So I stumbled into it. I never considered myself one, although I have to say that a friend of mine at the moment is working on a book about my ideas. Some of it will be biographical and some of it's my thoughts. And he's made me realize many things about myself that I didn't think. And he says, you do approach things in this fashion. So it has, I mean, like I said, we're not on an island. Everything has an influence upon you in your life, and I guess it had an influence on me. I mean, I'm retired now, have been for many years. I was 9 years just by coincidence as the boss, if you like, in the UK section, and I made sure that I found a successor who did a wonderful job, and I become an elder, which means I'm still a member. After all, you take your oath, you should oblige it. You should keep it, I think. But I haven't been to a meeting since Pontius was a pilot, as my granddad would have said.
So you don't really have a very active role in the guild now, then?
In the guild, I do, but not in chaos. I mean, I still have friends in it, and I still have some idea of what's going on because, of course, I am a member. So and I'm sure they'd be more than happy if I wish to go back. But and I'm not. Maybe I will attend something one day. If they ask me to speak, I certainly would. Why not?
Okay. I've got to ask also about what you said earlier about your interest in self-transformation, and sounds like from this biography you're still learning new things about yourself in this process, and that this process, you've told me previously, is centered on action rather than research. So to what end is this process intended? And have you changed as a person significantly? You say you have changed even in the last 5 years, but can you talk about how you've changed on this journey since you first became a pagan at the age of 17?
Well, I mean, some of this, of course, is obvious because when you get older, this happens anyway. But I've certainly become more mild. I mean, there's no question about it. I was as crazy as, a barrel full of frogs when I was young. And there was nothing that I wouldn't have done. And there's not many things. I mean, I don't regret anything I've done. And I don't regret many things I haven't done, because pretty well anything I have done it. I mean, even now at my age, remember, I grew up in an age when, my master, when I was an apprentice, would say, "What's the value of that resistor? Yeah, what's the value?" And if you didn't know, he'd smack you round the head. So different days. I'm not recommending them, but we were hard back then. It's a simple fact, and we learned. I learned my trade extremely well. And when I see workmen now, it just turns my stomach, because I just have no. I still see him over my shoulder. If I'm soldering a lead, I mean, recently I had to, in my house, I got the telephone cables and they just crimped. So I just take them off and solder them on so you get a proper connection. But I do it with a great deal of pride and skill, and I apply this to everything in my life. And I think that's very important. Of course, I'm doing what I always do, according to the man who's writing the book about me. I meander all over the place, and I sometimes don't even answer the question. Self-transformation. Well, it is very difficult, but I think if you know someone, you see it happening. But how would I define it? I mean, its ultimate aim, of course, is what we do, which is to look, we follow Odin in his footsteps, and he follows Runar. And Runar means the mystery, female noun, the great mystery. So I would say that you're faced the whole time with your nose against the darkness of the unknown, and you're just trying to move just a little bit into it. This is why anything's interesting, because it's knowledge. It's all about knowledge. And so, as I said in one of my songs, the journey has no end, for such was never meant, because you cannot. I mean, let's face it, you could study, for example, the sex habits of a bumblebee for 50 years and still not know everything about it, just for a sort of bizarre example. So imagine, and that's another thing, the old joke that my father used to say to me, and I realize now the truth of it. He used to say, when I was a young man, he used to say, "I wish I was 18 when I knew everything." You see, when you get to my age, you realize you literally don't know anything, because the more you learn, the more you dig down in, and it just, what you don't know gets wider and wider and wider, and it's frightening. So self-transformation is very difficult to define, but you do definitely see it in people. I mean, it's I know some people don't like this, but I think of it as being, if you like, an elite thing. Like I mentioned earlier about my apprenticeship, because it was relevant. We used to say a job worth doing is worth doing well. So I think the modern world is a conspiracy against all these things that I believe in. You know, I mean, for example, I remember old money. Now, 12, the hexadecimal system, is actually a better system for normal use. Metric's great for science. It's rubbish for normal use. You know, a gallon of water weighs 10 pounds, blah, blah, blah. I could go on about it. 12 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 6, and 12. You know, 10 is divisible by 1, 5, and 10. You know, it's just, but it makes you think, because it's slightly more awkward. And anything I think that encourages people to think is a good thing. Because one of the things that I see is thinking is about, people talk about common knowledge. There's no less common thing in the universe than common knowledge, than common sense. And that's, to me, sad. And so what I'm looking for in people is the old story. You know, the man goes to see this, it might have been a Sufi in the original, might have been a Nasruddin story. If you haven't seen the Nasruddin stories, by the way, look them up on the internet. Mullah Nasruddin, the Joker of the Islamic world. And he goes and sees this master, and it might be a Hindu story. Well, you know, did you see this? No, I'm watching how he ties his shoes. Because everything a master does, he does it as a master. And what this is about is being awake and being aware. And when you're aware, the world is a whole different place. And that's why Marcus Aurelius spoke about, you know, memento mori. Remember that your days are numbered, because if you do that, you know that you've just taken a breath in. Firstly, you need to be grateful for that because somebody else hasn't. But I don't want to be too maudlin, but you are right now able to think of something rather than thinking of something stupid. You can think of something good. You can read an intelligent book rather than, or as Aleister Crowley said, I don't read newspapers. It wastes time that can be more profitably employed. One of my favorite quotes, by the way. And sorry to lower the tone by mentioning St. Aleister, but, you know, like I said, I'm not a rock, so I've even studied him in my day. So I don't know, I probably haven't given you a satisfactory answer, but I'm not sure there is a satisfactory answer to that question, actually. But that's the best I can offer.
I think it's interesting that Odin, who is the god of this, is the initiatory god of the sacred mysteries, as you say, but he's also the god of the dead. And I don't think that's a coincidence or a contradiction, because this remembering death is part of understanding the mystery of life. You used to be very influenced by traditionalist themes. You're still a traditionalist, is that correct?
Yes, but I think there was always a big but there, because I'm a great believer in paradoxes as well. Because I mean, all right, yes, I was the last person anyone ever knew who got a smartphone, but due to certain circumstances,
How long did you hold it up for? I didn't get my first one till 2013, but I thought I was doing quite well.
Right, I've had mine for a few months, and
you win.
but it came up. Effectively, I inherited it, and then I know how to use it now, and I find it very useful because I've changed my life recently for various reasons, and so I remember. People often see me as a bit of a stick in the mud, but I remember when I took over as the editor of Chaos International magazine, I had to buy a computer, which I didn't have or know anything about. I had to learn how to use computers, learn how to do DTP, and I was one of the first people who had an internet connection. So I'm not against it. I'm just what Castaneda would call stalking it, which means that you need to be a master of it rather than letting it master you. And that I think, and that's why I don't let these things master me. They, I don't obey them. They do what I want them to do, sort of thing.
But I wanted to know, as a traditionalist, like person who's interested in traditionalist authors and those perspectives of people like Julius Evola, what do you make of the events of recent year? You know, the recent events of even the past year, which has been a very peculiar year, of the recent times of people becoming especially integrated with technology, distracted by events that aren't really directly related to their lives. This kind of thing, the changes that are happening to the Western world.
I think it's very worrying. I mean, one thing's for sure, when we come out of this present panic, the world will not be the same again. And I'm afraid I'm cynical enough to suspect that it will be worse, because one thing's for sure, and I know that nostalgia, one has to be aware of that, but the world is certainly worse than it was when I was young. In you know, I mean, silly examples. I mean, you know, I was a hooligan like you wouldn't believe when I was a young man, but I never carried a knife around. It never occurred to me. And two people didn't jump on one person. I'm not saying it never happened, but it didn't happen to people like me because it was considered wrong. And we never, ever, ever dropped litter because this was our country and we lived in it. And we don't want, you know, animals don't do that. And I didn't see why I should do it. So the world has got worse. And I fear that this, look, here's the deal. The first thing they want you to do is to carry something around. Then they want you to wear it, and then they want to have it in you. And then, are you a human anymore? And you could see this happening. You know, they are going. One thing's for sure, I would be most unhappy, and I'm sure I'm going to be in the mole country before it does go that far. But I do not want the idea of actually having anything implanted in me. I mean, obviously, if you had heart problems, you might, I mean, you've got to use a bit of common sense, or you make a choice. I'm not saying you shouldn't make that choice, but the idea of some of these neuromancers ideas leave me rather cold, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I feel like I have become more dependent on technology just from the lockdown, because obviously all my communications now, it doesn't have to be implanted into me for me to become dependent on it. Like smartphones are one of the worst examples, but there's everything. Now everyone's buying everything online, becoming much more dependent on technology as a result of these lockdowns that are happening. But yes, I thought that was certainly, as a traditionalist, maybe a sign of decline of some kind. So as someone, you're seeing nowadays a lot of people, one positive thing about the internet, and think that it's helped me to make to be able to spread information, knowledge about paganism, about the northern tradition, about the history of northern peoples and Indo-Europeans and Indo-European cultures. That's all happened because of the internet and because of the websites that have allowed me to spread it, the social media websites that and I've seen a massive, over the last 10 years, growth in interest in these subjects, and I think that's great. And a lot more people now are heathen or Odinist than were 10 years ago. The 2011 census showed a slight growth, but I think that the next census will show a lot more. But as you're someone who's been into Germanic and Indo-European paganism for much longer than most, much longer than me, and so I want to know how you feel about all the developments regarding both like the pop culture of Vikings on the History Channel and all like Marvel, Thor movies and stuff, making Nordic mythology interesting to people, and how that might have changed it. But also the kind of scientific developments that are like kind of reinforcing things that you and other people have always thought, which is that the Indo-Europeans and the Anglo-Saxons, these invasions happened. In like the DNA is now showing the Anglo-Saxon invasion did happen, the Indo-European like spread and invasions did happen, and that they weren't just it wasn't just cultures moving without people; it was peoples moving. So these developments quite revolutionary within the fields that you're interested in. So I just wanted to hear your perspective.
Well, I'm certainly glad that more people know about it. Of course, I'm uncomfortable with I was always uncomfortable as a young man with the Marvel depiction of Thor. Just a quick sort of like bit of madness, which I like doing. That's a Gloucester old spot peg.
Great breed.
And I pronounce that like my ancestors did in Hampshire. And my granddad would have said you can use all of a peg except for the squeak. So, there you go. Bit of
It's a
fun.
good breed.
No,
Yeah, my uncle used to have one.
one of the reasons we know how they spoke is there's a beautiful couple of letters that went into this farmer's show in London complaining because there were no Hampshire pigs in the in the show. And where I come from, of course, we're known as Hampshire hogs, but the hog actually is a hogget, which is a sheep, but that's another story, so not a pig. No, coming back to, I'm glad that it's spread around. I mean, the more people that know, the more quality you get. But of course, you also have to live with the fact that most people, you know, they're just going to leave it at a low level. But I mean, this is what this is why I'm glad that you do that, Tom, because it's people who put out quality material need to use the latest methods. You know, we mustn't be against technology for sure. And like you said, it also enables you, if you're discerning, and this is a big problem because you do have to use a certain amount of discernment, with, particularly with the internet. But if you are, and you learn a little bit yourself, and you look at papers rather than necessarily books, books are good, but the papers are the latest information because they'll go in a paper and they'll put them in a book later. So I always do that. And when you do this, you will be able to discern properly what's good. And then the stuff you can learn. I mean, when I was a kid, like I say, R.W.V. Eliot's book, Runes and Introduction, was it. Simple as that. So you had to learn, I mean, even to this day, which is going to shock some, well, probably depends how far, where they live. But I was told, and I believe this, by Professor Michael Barnes, when I studied runology at University College of London, that only about 20% of anything written on runes is actually in English. Now that will get more and more and more now because most of the people are writing in English, but most of the seminal works are not. And what I found on this course was that I had to read a Scandinavian language, which I didn't know. Of course, I immediately started learning it, but luckily I looked around and found German sources which covered the same material, and my German's perfectly fluent, so that was good. But yeah, I'm all for this, you know, and I hope anyone who's watching this channel, you know, you are so lucky because when I was young, we didn't have this. But what you need to do, you need to approach it in the way that we did when we were young, seriously. And you need to, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a great academic, but I have gone into the world of academia. I studied at UCL. I didn't do a degree because I didn't want to. The life of Strindberg, for example, didn't interest me. It may be interesting, but it was outside. So all I did is paid. Wouldn't be possible now because the price has gone up and up and up. But I paid to do the various courses I did. And I'm sure they're online now. And in fact, one of the things that I've often said to groups, if you're running a group now and you're not getting yourself up online and keeping your members together and exciting them, then you're making a big mistake, because a lot of groups that didn't do that in this period, I think, will start fading away after this period. So I'm a great supporter of modern technology for its usefulness, but there is a negative side to it. But I don't think necessarily that the negative side needs to outweigh the positive side. It depends, as I said before, on the quality of the people, I think.
Yeah, I think there is some. It does seem that there, from what I can understand of the early Odinism in the UK in the 80s, it was a lot more. It was small, but with small but very dedicated groups of people who have continued for 20, 30 years. Whereas now it's more in fashion, and there's certainly a lot more people who are interested in it, but they don't really necessarily do anything, which might be a symptom of the age itself, where people just have the outward appearance of an interest without actually following it through. But do you think that might be it?
Oh, I definitely do think it is it. I mean, I think people, that's the danger, you see. They see it, they think, why would I bother to contact these people, whoever they are in whatever sphere, because it's all on the internet, I can study it myself. Well, what you will find is that I haven't been wasting the last coming on for 50 years. So there's things which I give to people mouth to ear, which are not in any book, I just speak about me, but there's lots of me's around, people even more capable of doing this than I am. And so that's what you get, is you get information that no one's going to put on the internet, because sometimes obvious reasons. I mean, you know, I
It's got to
wouldn't
be
like to.
esoteric. It's got to be. It can't be out in public. Then
Well, precisely, there are things for sure that have to be go from mouth to ear. There's no question about this. And, you know, at the various levels, for example, in the Rune-Gild, there are some secrets, and they are conveyed in that fashion, and you don't write them down and you try to remember them. And they are things that are not recorded anywhere. But as soon as you hear them, it will resonate in you. And you know, the greatest truths, the ones when you hear them, you think, oh my God, of course. Sometimes you think, I already knew that. That's the joke, you see. I often think of all the Uncle Remus's stories and all those sort of things I learnt as a kid. You know, Brer Rabbit, don't, you know, saying to Brer Fox, don't throw me into the briar patch. And the fox thinks, well, you know, that's a horrible place, I'm going to throw him in there. Of course, the rabbit loves it. He's tricked him because that's where he lives. Well, silly little story like that. You think about that. That tells you a great deal of things about all sorts. You know, how you can, that you must not just stick with your worldview. I mean, I'm a therapist, one of the things I do, NLP, and you have to take someone's reality. So someone comes to you and says, I'm frightened of a mouse, and he's like a very large man, if you like, that looks like a seriously dangerous boxer. And, you know, you might think that's ridiculous. Look at the size of a mouse, but he knows that. How's that helping? So you have to take that as real. He is frightened of that. And in his world, that is real. And you deal with it from that perspective. Plus, we know that beliefs are very low down on how you change people. You change them by other methods. But I won't go too much into this. But for example, you know, that's something I think is important. All these old things. And I hope, I really do, that children still learn these old stories, you know, the tortoise and the hare.
Aesop's fables.
All those, you know, even like I mentioned earlier, the Nasruddin stories, do not fail to remember to look up Mullah Nasruddin afterwards, because the stories are being told to this very day, and they are quite funny, actually. I suppose they're a bit like the Till Eulenspiegel stories from northern Germany, although there aren't so many of them. I did translate a few and put them in Rune magazine. Actually, they were translated from Middle High German.
Are those folk stories or some kind of old folk tales, medieval folk tales or something?
Yeah, Till Eulenspiegel was like a jester, if you like, and around the times of the 30 Years' War, which was a sort of unpleasant war. And he went around Germany largely making jokes that the priests didn't like very much. You know, so this is the strange thing about the Christian religion. When you look at it, you see that people didn't like it. They were forced to like it. I mean, folk songs, and also when you study folk music, you know, the Bitter Withy, for a perfect example, you know, Jesus as a young lad, he goes down he goes, and he sees these lads and they're messing around, and he wants to join in with them, but they don't like him. So they're rude to him. So he walks into the water and they follow him and drown. And he goes back and his mother beats him. Bitter Withy is like a bunch of sticks. She beats him for being a naughty boy. Well, you think, if the church knew that this was how they viewed this, they had no idea of orthodoxy and didn't care really. And you can tell this over and over again, and they weren't frightened of the devil. The devil was someone you tricked. They were frightened of death, the Grim Reaper, and so on and so forth. And that's another thing I think very important. The bits that aren't recorded, because, you know, we're talking, the people who recorded it, of course, they went into the village and they said, oh, you haven't got your violin tuned properly, and they tune it up, and, you know, and he tuned it to some sort of key that worked best with his singing or whatever. And, you know, quite honestly, those songs are absolutely full of extraordinary material. And Bob Stewart is one of the few people who has written about this, but sadly not often enough.
I said that there's a kind of cheekiness that you see in some folk stories and folk music, where it's sort of a little bit disrespectful towards the clergy and stuff, and that kind of persists for a long time, and there must be some enduring sentiment behind it. Yeah, it must be my internet. So I was saying, is there some kind of firework display going on in your garden?
Yeah, so I was going to mention about that. At the moment, it's Bundy Chaw, which I suppose most people more commonly known as Diwali. And of course, they are letting rockets off and bangers. And so I've got the window shut and it's double glazed. But believe me, it's very, if I went out there, it'll burst my eardrums, I think, you know. So,
I forgot it was Diwali. Oh, well, take a couple of questions from the audience before we finish up. So, any interesting ones? I wanted also to ask you about your you said that you might have some an album coming up, or maybe several albums coming up, or you weren't sure about that.
Well, nothing happens very fast, I'm afraid, with me. But I am working with a friend of mine from the old days who used to do Viking reenactment with, and he writes the most extraordinary lyrics about the 9 worlds and matters like that. And they're so wonderful that I said to him I would definitely help him do an album. And he was quite keen to make it a Fire and Ice album. And I said, well, I'd be more than happy. So that would be project number 1, which is more likely, I think. I'm working myself on the next album, and there is a third possibility of something that's long been written. And I tried to put one track on Fractured Man. In fact, we recorded it, but there were technical problems. So Bob Furbrush didn't get enough material to make that happen. Fortunately, since I've managed to make I want to be a better song out of it, I think. And this is a friend of mine who wrote a book called The Road to Thor, which is about how the world gets flooded. And it's a great book. And southern England basically goes back to worshipping the old gods, and they're having to fight against the church. And there's several songs in this book, 1 or 2 traditional and some he's written. So I do hope one day to help him to make an album out of that.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I look forward to that. Yeah, I think yeah, so I'd like also, you have a blog, don't you? Do you not? The route that I've put in the description that everyone can see. What sort of things can people find on the blog?
Oh, blimey, there's all sorts. It's there, you will find papers about interesting matters, you will find poetry, you will find a list of Rune magazines that I still have to sell if anyone's interested in back issues, and general things of interest to anyone who is likes the sort of broad Indo-European stroke Northern European world, if you like. Just it's obviously, like all these things, it's pretty voluntary, and it started off Erminster Hall, which is my own hall, if you like, of the Rune-Gild. We worked very, very hard to expand into Europe because we don't want to be an organization that's just based in America and England. So and we want people to have their own control of their own country. So we started this blog, and we're just launching a website at some point, and we'll probably amalgamate the two. But I think, have a look at it. If you're interested in this, what's going on right here, you'll probably have some interest in what's on that blog as well. They're only short pieces. We try, do them every couple of weeks, but not great big lengthy pieces.
I encourage everyone to check out Rune-Gild in the description, and just wanted to thank you, Ian, very much for joining us today. It's been really fascinating learning about your work and the Rune-Gild and all your wealth of experience as a pagan and as a creator, musician. And do you have any closing remarks for any aspiring creatives, like musicians and artists and stuff, who want to use art as an expression of heathenism or the northern tradition or related traditions?
Well, it's important that you believe in yourself, and it's important that you do Start doing right now. Don't wait. You never know what's coming tomorrow. Remember this. It's one step and then another step and then another step. And when you stop, they all disappear behind you. So that's why it says in the Halvamar, you know, judge a man when he's dead. So basically, start working, try to keep up the quality as best you can, believe in yourself, find good people. You know, it's what our India, you know, these people worshipping Diwali or Bandichat, and particularly the Sikhs, they call Sangha, you know, the community. You have a good community of people around you, of worthy people, and you work with them. And then the world's your oyster.
Thank you. Hail to those that listen. Good night, everyone.